Okay, so when I started this channel, I definitely didn't think that I was going to have 3 videos on sports washing, let alone 2 almost completely Chelsea specific videos in the first couple of months. But I guess we do kind of have to talk about this. Roman Abramovich. Ah! Chelsea are an absolute mess right now, which, to be fair, it seems like does happen to them every couple of years or so. But this time it's not a fun Jose Mourinho burning it all down kind of thing, so much as it's a 1 degree away from Putin, government sanctions, assets being frozen, people maybe losing their jobs, entire club as we know it ceasing to exist kind of thing. One of those. We've all been there. So what's going on here? To sum it up in entirely too little detail, the British government is attempting to help put the squeeze on Vladimir Putin by also putting the squeeze on some of his closest allies, which includes a group of very wealthy men and women known as the oligarchs. There are around 100 of these guys and gals, all of whom are extremely wealthy and hold an incredible amount of power within the Russian state. And one of the ways that governments around the world have come up with to sanction Putin for, stuff, is to sanction these guys too. In the past week, the UK government has frozen the UK based assets of 7 of the richest people in Russia, whose total net worth adds up to over $15 billion. The idea is to try and hit Putin and his allies where it hurts them the most, their wallets. Military occupations are expensive in a number of different ways, and without the support of the oligarchs, the hope is that it's going to be a lot more difficult for Putin to get what he wants. So, bank accounts have been frozen, yachts have been seized, and assets that were previously a tool for these men and women to curry favor with in England and other countries in the West are now in serious jeopardy. And while that might not seem on the face of it like something super relevant to a sports channel, it very much is. Because one of these oligarchs that's been sanctioned, arguably the most important one, is Roman Abramovich. And one of those assets that's been frozen is Chelsea FC, which Abramovich owns, and is one of the biggest, most important football clubs in the entire world. And what's going on at Chelsea in the aftermath of that decision is nothing short of otherworldly. As of last week, Chelsea are no longer able to sell new tickets, sell merchandise, make any transfers of any kind, charter private travel that costs over a certain amount of money, or really do anything that would potentially bring in money that would eventually go to Roman Abramovich. Even if this wasn't a club that's spent the better part of the last 20 years spending hundreds of millions of dollars on players and only last year won the Champions League, those circumstances would be pretty incredible. But because it is Chelsea, and we're used to them being one of the wealthiest, most successful clubs in the world, that fall from grace seems like it's going to hit even harder. And make no mistake about it, this is an existential threat for Chelsea. The situation is completely unprecedented, but as it stands, if the club can't find a buyer, and fast, then there's no telling how long those sanctions are going to be in place for. As long as Abramovich is connected to the club in any way, Chelsea are in serious danger. But as serious as things are at Chelsea at the moment, I would argue that this isn't so much a right now problem as it is a last 20 years or so problem. It's tough for someone my age to imagine this, but Chelsea have not always been the dominant force that we know them as now. When Abramovich bought them in 2003, they'd only won one First Division title in their entire history, and back in the 80s, they'd been in so much financial trouble that the guy that Abramovich bought the club from, a British businessman named Ken Bates, bought the club for only £1. They'd had a smattering of FA and League Cup wins here and there, but before 2003, this wasn't even a club that would reliably finish inside the top 4, let alone be challenging for League and Champions League titles every season. But then Abramovich came along, and everything changed. Suddenly, with the financial backing of this secluded billionaire that people didn't really know that much about, Chelsea were spending dozens, if not hundreds of millions of pounds on players every offseason, including some legitimate icons of the game, like Hernan Crespo, Didier Drogba, Juan Sebastian Veron, Michael Essien, and Andrei Shevchenko. The year before Abramovich bought the team, they spent exactly no money on transfers. But the year after, 187 million. Within 2 years, they'd won the league, and within 10, they were champions of Europe too. And as much as Abramovich's investment changed Chelsea, which is basically creating an entirely new club from an existing one, his financial power and incredible level of spending changed the landscape of soccer across the world forever, and paved the way for other mega-rich owners to follow suit. That's the history of Chelsea in the modern era. First, Abramovich buys the club, then he buys half the players in Europe, and they win everything under the sun, and then, well, we don't know what happens next, and I don't think we will for a while. We've talked a ton about sports washing on this channel already. What it is, why powerful people seem so fond of it, and the effects it can have. But what we've seen with Chelsea is maybe the best example of the psychological grip that sports washing can have on a fan base, especially in how it can weaponize the better instincts of fans to make them look the other way. Because, like I said earlier, Abramovich was in charge for 19 whole years. There are players in Chelsea's squad right now who haven't been alive for much longer than that. But in all that time, Abramovich has barely spoken publicly. He hasn't lived in London for years, and all told, there's been very little opportunity for Chelsea fans to actually get to know the man who finances their club. Or to put it another way, to understand where all those hundreds of millions of dollars were really coming from. For the past 20 years, Chelsea have become an interesting psychological experiment and trying to understand how much people are willing to stomach for the sake of supporting their favorite team. Because it's not like these connections between Roman Abramovich and the Russian government are just popping up. There's evidence of him being involved with Putin's political career going all the way back to when Putin was first elected. As he got into office, one of Putin's first tasks was to win over the country's oligarchs to try and consolidate more power to the state. He mostly did this by getting oligarchs locked up on tax evasion charges and reallocating most of their assets, but at least one notable oligarch managed to avoid that fate. Roman Abramovich got to keep all of his stuff, which at the time included Sibneft, one of the most powerful oil companies in the world, and even got to go out and acquire some new stuff, like Chelsea Football Club. And to tie it all together with stuff we've talked about before, he was also evidently a pretty key figure in getting the World Cup to Russia in 2018, which was an extremely important political win for this gentleman, using that term loosely. The point here is that everyone has known for a long time that Abramovich's money and his ability to hold on to it is inextricably linked to Putin. In many ways, you can't really have one without the other, but for the average fan, the gap between caring about the geopolitics of a country 3,000 plus miles away and whether or not your team is going to be able to beat Brighton on Saturday is large. And I'm not saying that to blame Chelsea fans for Abramovich being allowed to continue as long as he has. It's very much not their fault, and that's kind of the point. His position has allowed him to shield himself from having to actually answer any questions that might upset the people paying to see all those expensive players. Journalists know that there are certain things you just can't ask at Chelsea, because it might upset Mr. Abramovich, and they can't afford that. The gap between the man at the top of the club and the people filling out the seats at Stamford Bridge is so large that independently of him bringing in the players that they want, or them seeing one of his yachts while they're on vacation, Roman Abramovich might as well not exist at all. And that's exactly what he wants. That separation has created the space where his association with the club can be positive for his image instead of negative for Chelsea's. Up until now, at least, Chelsea fans may have even liked this man of mystery as the owner of their club, or at least liked that it made it okay for them to root for them despite his obvious drawbacks. A situation like that, where a person can think that Putin is terrible, but that his ally running Chelsea is probably fine, is what's known in psychology as cognitive dissonance. Behaving one way despite ostensibly believing something else is part of the human experience, and in the case of sports washing, that's what a man like Roman Abramovich, who at the very least used Chelsea to establish himself in the West, is counting on. I know you all know what I've done in the past, and who I've helped, but I'm doing this thing you like now, so just pay attention to that. Because it's more important to you anyway. And I know that my own personal allegiances may make it seem like this is just me kicking Chelsea fans while they're down, but I promise it isn't. Your club was great before Abramovich, and it'll be great after him too. I said earlier that sports washing can take the best parts of us and use them for other people's gain, and that's exactly what I think is happening here. Abramovich and now the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund are counting on the fact that fans' love for their team usually outranks their disapproval of anything the owners might have done. And for any of my American viewers who might be thinking to themselves, wow, those Europeans really need to get their act together, not so fast. Because do you remember when the Nets moved to Brooklyn? Their owner at the time was not actually Jay-Z, but an eccentric Russian billionaire named Mikhail Prokhorov, who, like Abramovich, came in promising to spend loads of money to make the Nets into a title contender, and, also like Abramovich, is a member of the Russian oligarchy. It is long past time for teams and fans to start really evaluating the people that own teams, not at the point where it's discovered or decided that they've done something despicable, but before they can get their hands on the asset that we care about so much. Because most of the time, that's what it is to them, an asset, to be used for their own personal gain. And in a business climate, most assets don't care that much about who you used to be friends with, but this kind should. Because spare a thought for your Chelsea fan friend who might be about to have their team ripped apart. Spare a thought for your Newcastle fan friend who's about to have to navigate all this for themselves for God knows how long. And most of all, spare a thought for men like Oleksandr Zinchenko and Andriy Yarmolenko, who will have to step onto the pitch at Stamford Bridge knowing that the man who's owned that field for the majority of their lives is exactly 0 degrees of separation from the man currently invading their country. Think of all the games they've already had to play at the same time that Russia was planning that military occupation. Think of Andrei Shevchenko, the greatest soccer player in the history of Ukraine, who was also one of the first megastars that Roman Abramovich signed for Chelsea. That's Roman Abramovich's real legacy. Not the trophies that his teams won for him, but the connections to Putin that he worked so hard to wave away, and the shroud of mystery around himself that he worked so hard to maintain. And now it's coming down, and everyone can start to see what was there the whole time. That is cognitive dissonance. Hello to everyone out there who made it to the end. Congratulations! I'm Will, and I thought we were done with sports watching, but I guess not. People are still going to be awful, I guess, and it'll still be up to us to talk about it. Who knows, there may be even more videos on it in the future. But if there are any Chelsea fans out there watching this, do me a favor, because I know y'all are going through a rough time right now. Put one thing in the comments that you love about your club, whether it's a favorite moment, favorite player, or just something that brought you near to them in the first place. I want to hear about it. Hopefully, it can sustain you in the weeks and months ahead. You all sustain me every week, and I'm off now to start working on the next one. And until then, I'll see you guys next time.